This is a story about what it's like to return home only to find that home isn't there anymore. We're going to dive into a chapter from Khalid Hosseini's The Kite Runner, and we'll be following a man named Amir as he re-enters Kabul and has to confront the ghosts of the city he once knew and loved.
Kabul is not the way you remember it. That's the warning Amir gets from his driver, Fareed, right at the start. It's such a simple sentence, right? But it's loaded with this sense of dread. It's a promise of the heartbreak that's coming, and it perfectly captures that gap between the city that lives in his memory and the harsh reality that's waiting for him. So Amir's journey back to Kabul actually begins on the road to Kabul. And, long before he even gets close to the city, the landscape itself is already telling this awful story of 2 decades of nonstop, brutal conflict. And you can feel the decay in the most basic things, like even just the travel time. A drive that used to take 2 hours is now a 4-hour ordeal. The road itself is just scarred with craters and debris. It's become this physical symbol of the entire country's breakdown. Yeah, and this isn't just a longer drive. It's literally a drive through a graveyard of history. Amir is just surrounded by these ghosts of the Soviet invasion and the civil war that came after. He's seeing rusted-out tanks and the charred remains of whole villages, where every single ruin was once somebody's home. So, as Amir finally arrives in the city, this is when the true shock really sets in. The vibrant, bustling Kabul of his memory, it's gone, and in its place is this desolate, haunting reality. You can really boil down everything he sees to just 2 words: rubble and beggars. The city's buildings have collapsed, sure, but so has its entire social fabric. The streets are filled with begging children, an entire generation whose fathers were just swallowed up by the war. Amid all this devastation, Amir does what any of us would do. He clings to a memory, right? A very specific, joyful piece of his past. He remembers this old man named Saifo and his little kite shop. It was a symbol of a more innocent time, of the cultural lifeblood of the city. And just like that, Fareed completely shatters that bit of nostalgia. The Taliban, you see, has erased these cultural touchstones. Kite flying, which was once this beloved pastime, is just gone. And this is a classic tactic of authoritarian control, isn't it? You don't just police people's actions, you police their joy. You erase a shared culture to break a people's spirit. That phrase, "those days are over," just becomes this heartbreaking refrain. And the contrast is a total sensory assault. He remembers this bustling street, the glow of neon lights, the amazing smell of lamb kebab. But now, it's a ruin that just stinks of diesel fuel. The city he knew doesn't just look different. It smells and feels completely, totally alien. Okay, so in the middle of all this ruin, something completely improbable happens. A chance encounter with a beggar provides this unexpected, shocking link to Amir's long-lost past. This is how the beggar greets him. I mean, can you imagine? Not with a plea for money, but with a line from the great poet Hafez. And even though he's in rags, he speaks like a scholar. Amir knows right away this is no ordinary man. And it turns out, this man, now begging on the street for scraps, was once a university professor of literature. His story is basically the story of Kabul in miniature, the total and utter collapse of the city's intellectual and cultural class. And then Amir mentions that his mother also taught at the university, and the professor's face just changes. A stunning connection is made. In a city of millions of people, this stranger on the street actually knew the mother. Amir never got the chance to know himself. The professor then shares this beautiful memory of Amir's mother. Her words, they reveal this fear that such profound happiness couldn't possibly last. And in that moment, from a total stranger on the street, Amir gets a more personal, more real glimpse into his mother's soul than his own father ever gave him. This encounter, well, it just strengthens his resolve. It reminds him why he's there as he turns to the real purpose of his journey, finding his young nephew, Sohrab, at an orphanage in the war-ravaged district of Kite. So the search begins with this really tense standoff right at the orphanage door. The director, a man named Zaman, is immediately suspicious. He flat out denies seeing the boy and locks them out. It's only when Amir reveals his family connection, that he's the boy's uncle, that Zaman hesitates, caught between his own fear and maybe a tiny flicker of hope. But this is the detail that truly opens the door. When Amir mentions that Sohrab is good with a slingshot, a trait he shared with his father Hassan,
That's when Zaman knows he's telling the truth. He's great with the slingshot, he corrects him, and finally he lets them inside. But getting inside, that only leads to an even darker discovery. Here, the grim reality of this orphanage is laid bare, along with the horrifying, awful truth about why Sohrab is missing. Just look at this. The conditions inside are devastating. There aren't enough beds or blankets, so kids have literally frozen to death. There's hardly any food. The director has spent his entire life savings just to keep the place running because the Taliban offers zero help. It's a place of absolute desperation. And then, Saman makes his chilling confession. A Taliban official, he visits every month or two. He brings a little bit of cash, and in exchange, he takes a child. Usually a girl, he says, but not always. This is Zaman's desperate justification for what he does. It's a terrible, impossible moral calculus, isn't it? He sacrifices one child to save many more, swallowing his pride and taking what he calls filthy, dirty money just to buy a little more food for the others. And then comes the final gut-wrenching blow. The official has already been there. He took Sohrab a month ago. Amir's entire journey, his hope for a simple rescue, has just become infinitely more complicated and so much more dangerous. And that leaves us with this haunting question, doesn't it? It's really the central dilemma of this whole ordeal. In a world that's been stripped of all resources and all safety, people like Director Zaman are forced into these impossible moral corners. And it forces us to ask the same question he must ask himself every single day. When just surviving is the only goal, where do you draw the line between being a victim and becoming an accomplice?